Thank you so much, Lakshmi. So scriptural reasoning is a tool for interfaith dialogue whereby people of different faiths come together to read and reflect on their scriptures. Unlike some forms of interfaith engagement, it's not about seeking agreement, but rather exploring the texts and their possible interpretations across faith boundaries, and it helps us to learn to disagree better. So reading, listening, and reflecting on scriptures is something that we do naturally within our own worshipping communities. But participants of scriptural reasoning, they're not asked to leave that behind. Rather, as people from different faith traditions come together to read and reflect on their scriptures side by side, something really unique happens. So scriptural reason isn't about agreement, but it's rather exploring the texts and their possible interpretations across faith boundaries. The result is often a deeper understanding of our own faith tradition, as well as the scriptures of other people. And it can help develop strong bonds across faith communities. Scriptural reasoning is practiced globally, all over the world, and including places affected by religious-related tensions and conflicts. And it provides a forum where people can look at some things that maybe are a bit uncomfortable, where difference is at the heart of the conversation and not consensus. And it's done in a safe way. So I do want to say for any of our speakers, if at any point somebody says something they don't feel comfortable, do feel free just to say, I don't feel able to answer that, because we want to respect and treat you well, that you are sharing from your personal faith experiences, and we really value that window that we're going to be gaining into your thoughts. So I hope that has set the scene for us, just to have a broad overview. Before we start, is there anybody from the teaching community that have any questions at this stage after what I have just introduced? If you have, you can pop it in the text box, in the chat box. Otherwise, can I just say, if anything occurs to you as we're going through, if you just pop it in the chat box, we will have 3 presentations, and we have about 10 minutes for each presentation. And at the end of each presentation, there'll be an invitation for the other contributors just to model scriptural reasoning and ask for clarification or question. And we ask you to save questions until the end, but there will be space at the end for you to ask any questions. So anything that occurs to you, pop it in the chat box, and then at the end there'll be opportunity for further questions. So I'm going to start by introducing a very special lady. All of our contributors are very special. She's a dear friend to Rose Castle. She's Rabbi Dr. Lindsay Taylor Gunther. And she's been doing, and she's been doing some research into the religious lives of Orthodox Jewish women, and she's been doing that at UCL. And she's got a lot of experience of scriptural reasoning over many years, and it goes back to 2003. So she has a lot of experience. So we're very privileged that she's been able to give her time this afternoon to come and share something from the Jewish tradition about what it means to be fair and in justice. So I'm going to ask Lakshmi, if you wouldn't mind, can you do the screen share? And then pin Lindsay, and I will pass the floor over to Lindsay for her to begin to share.
Okay, so lovely to see everyone. The text we're going to look at comes from the Torah, the foundational scripture of Judaism. And just to explain, because it is a little confusing, the Hebrew Bible and the Old Testament contain the same books, but they're not arranged in the same way. So the Hebrew Bible consists of the 5 books of the Torah, then the books of the prophets, and then the books of the writings. And the Torah is the most authoritative and oldest part. So the text we're going to look at comes from the first book of the Torah, from Genesis, or Breshit in Hebrew, and it comes from near the end of the book, after we've had a series of stories about the patriarchs and matriarchs of the people of Israel. We've had Abraham and Sarah, we've had Isaac and Rebekah, we've had Jacob and Esau and the various wives of Jacob. And this episode comes from the end of Jacob's life. And again, just to clarify one thing before we start, Jacob is renamed Israel in the middle of his life, but both new names are used interchangeably. So sometimes he's called Israel, sometimes he's called Jacob. And this is a scene, they said, from the end of his life with his youngest son, almost youngest son, Joseph, and his grandchildren. So I'll read it. And Israel stretched out his right hand and placed it on Ephraim's head, yet he was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head. He crossed his hands, though Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed them and said, the God in whose presence my fathers walked, Abraham and Isaac, the God who has looked after me all my life till this day, the messenger rescuing me from all evil, may he bless the lads. Let my name be called in them, and the name of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac. Let them teem multitudinous in the midst of the earth. And Joseph saw that his father had placed his right hand on Ephraim's head, and it was wrong in his eyes. And he took hold of his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head. And his father refused, and he said, I know, my son, I know. He too shall become a people, and he too shall be great. But his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall be a fullness of nations. And he blessed them that day, saying, by you shall Israel bless, saying, may God set you as Ephraim and Manasseh. And he set Ephraim before Manasseh. So here we have a situation of unfairness. In the society of the time, it was firstborn sons who had the extra right. They often got a double portion of inheritance, and they were seen as the recipients of their father's primary blessings. And this story repeats a pattern we've seen before, where younger sons get the blessing or get the status or become the principal heirs of their fathers, and not the firstborn sons. And this pattern repeats many, many times in both in Genesis and elsewhere in the Torah and elsewhere in the whole of the Hebrew Bible. So it's a situation of unfairness, you could say. And it's an interesting text to explore because it brings us back in this repetition of this motif. Why is God apparently unfair? Or one presumes that God is moving Israel to do this. In other cases, God explicitly says, no, it's the younger son who is going to be the one who is special. So what's that about? By the standards of society at the time, that seems really, really unfair. So I think one of the things in scriptural reasoning is if you're talking about the text, you shouldn't explain it too much to leave room for other people to do the unpacking and exploring. So I don't want to pursue all those questions to their logical end. I just want to raise some more questions about fairness and justice. And one of the questions we do need to ask is, from whose point of view? Who is the arbiter of fairness and justice? And is divine fairness and justice different from human fairness and justice? The particular stories all have slightly different circumstances. So there are different ways this theme plays out. But it is, on the face of it, unfair. And that invites us to reconsider what fairness might be, and the sources of fairness, and how we deal with unfairness if it comes not from other people, but apparently from the divine. So I think probably I'll just leave it there, because it's always more interesting to explore the questions than to hear people telling you what the text means. So I'll leave it there, and let's have some questions.
Okay, Lakshmi, I wonder whether or not you could stop screen share and then pin Lindsay and Rithi and Sheba, and we'll just have a chance for them to ask or respond to what's been said. I wonder whether or not Rithi, have you got any response from what's been said, or would you like to go first?
Yes, it's interesting that you spoke about at the time what was fair and how we see things now. As readers read the story today, how can they make an injustice at the time relevant to what they see in their lives today about fairness? That's a clear question.
Yeah.
I think that ties in very much with at least one of the purposes of these ancestor stories in the book of Genesis, which is very much, they resonate. They can be used to consider one's own position. So, for instance, here we have unfairness between siblings. I'd say that's quite a current theme. We've seen it in some high quarters recently. So the key, I think, to reading these stories is very much to look for the universals in them, which are mostly there. And it's no accident at all that many of the stories in Genesis are about family dynamics and the sort of thing that is absolutely universal. And the stories are meant to provoke thought and also to offer options and also to look at different ways in which the protagonists respond to those challenges. And they are very rich, they're sort of endlessly interpretable and understandable, and you can come back to them again and again. And because there are several of them, I think they resonate also with different people at different times. But the basic situation of, I was expecting X and it didn't happen, that's not fair, is a universal one. So for me, that's the way to read them, is to read them with understanding of the historical context, but also exploring what their relevance would be for me today.
There is, isn't there? There's something very universal about family tensions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's very easy to relate to.
Yes, and Genesis is full of dysfunctional families in many different ways. Yes.
Yes. Sheba, I wonder whether you have any comments, responses, points of
it just kind of like these days everyone keeps on thinking of Harry and William, and it kind of brings that to mind, that if some of that can be a lesson, but I was just wondering what happened after this blessing was kind of reversed. What happened afterwards?
Oh, that's quite interesting, because much less happens as a consequence than in some of the other stories about unfairness, with brothers who are competing or members of the family who are competing. And in this case, neither Ephraim nor Manasseh actually end up as big characters in any stories at all. However, one of the historical dimensions might be that Israel stroke Jacob's sons become the 12 tribes of Israel. And Joseph, the favorite son, gets a double lot, because he is told by his father that both his sons will become tribes. So there is no tribe of Joseph, but there are two tribes, one called Ephraim, one called Manasseh. And much later on in the period of the monarchy, Ephraim does become a dominant tribe, not Manasseh. And Ephraim becomes the sort of type tribe of the northern kingdom, and boss tribe, if you like. Yeah. So in some sense, there's a historical consequence, but not a personal consequence. So that's quite interesting too.
Yeah, and it's a very strong message, it's a very strong message, that do not presume that you will get something just because of maybe birth order or some other natural occurrence. Do not presume that God's gonna give you that blessing. It's a very strong message, especially in times when somebody's not feeling very hopeful. So thank you for sharing this.
Yes, and that you can see also in some of the other ones. There's definitely exactly the message you said, that you can't just rest on your laurels and go, well, I'm the firstborn, I'm going to get everything.
Yeah, yes.
Yes, especially in the divine
Yeah.
perspective, that might not be enough.
Yeah, yes,
So,
yes, yes.
so again, we're back to that question of
Yeah.
human justice versus divine justice.
Mm. Yes, maybe God is modeling something for people
Yes.
that, hey, everybody start thinking in this way as well.
Yes,
Oh,
definitely
mm.
something to do with that.
And one thing I noticed across this story in all three of them is that they always challenge an existing, held belief amongst a lot of people. And it does seem to be a patriarchal figure or a divine figure that one would think has put this law in place to keep people in their relative positions in society, that then goes ahead and challenges that. Which is,
yeah, very much so. Yeah.
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 It intrigued me, Lindsay, when I read this, that it's Joseph who is the one that's actually worried about the younger brother getting a benefit when he was one of the younger ones himself. And it's almost like he has, he's blind to the fact that he's benefited himself from having this favoritism demonstrated to him. So there's a sort of an irony in that whole kind of dynamic, isn't it?
There's huge irony here, and in some of the other stories too, where people, sneakily do X and then complain when somebody does it to them. Yeah, so definitely there's something there about reflecting on, what's good sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander, or you did this. Why are you surprised it happens to you? As sort of there's definitely an ironic level to this story as well. Yeah. There's also a not quite self-fulfilling, but the expression that the people of Israel will bless according to this phrase, may God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. And in current Jewish practice, on Friday nights, parents bless their children. And when they get to sons, they do indeed say that line, may God bless you like Ephraim and Manasseh. So that is definitely something that is part of Jewish practice today, and maybe referring back to the story, it's sort of maybe there's a little hint there to siblings that, okay, don't take your position for granted. You've got to be a worthy person as well as just the firstborn or just the bigger sibling or something. Yeah.
Well, as the firstborn in my family, I take that heed. So yes, don't take things for granted. Okay. Thank you, Lindsay. That's been really, really helpful. I'm going to ask Rithi, would you like to start sharing from your tradition? Just before you do that, I just want to thank Rithi for joining us. Rithi has worked for a number of years with the Story Tent, and she's got significant experience in this interfaith space, and we're really looking forward to hearing what she has to say from the Hindu tradition about what's not fair and justice. So I think that Lakshmi is going to share the text pack, which will be available for everybody at the end of this session. So I'll hand over to you, Rithi. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Lakshmi, please do scroll down as well. There's some helpful contextual information. I'd like to just say that the context that I'll give is all the points that I'm making are really helpful when framing this for children and young people as kind of a guide to help them to ask questions rather than being told, through the story. It helps them to think about some of these things. One of the core principles in Hinduism is that all living things, actually all living and non-living things, are created by the same divine energy, which would imply there's some equality and parity between anything in the world and indeed our universe. And that sometimes comes up against another common belief in or practice in many cultures in the subcontinent around caste and positions in society and status as well. This story is about Lord Krishna, who is an avatar of Lord Vishnu, and he's known to recite some important verses of wisdom in the 18th chapter Bhagavad Gita. And he's a main character in the story. And as he was growing up, he had many friends of all different backgrounds. And one of his closest friends was Siddhartha, who was a man from not very well high socioeconomic background, and and was quite poor growing up. But despite this difference, they were friends. This story comes from a very long book called the Bhagavad Purana, and Purana means history. And it was dated to be about around 2500 BC, as part of an oral tradition that has since been documented. A couple of quotations there. Vasudeva Kutumba Kutum. It's also from a Hindu text, the Upanishad, which means the world is one family. So I'll just quickly go through the story. So that's scrolling back up, please, Lakshmi. So when Krishna was a young boy, one of his closest friends was Sudama. Sudama came from a poor family. When they grew up, Krishna went to live in a palace. He was wise, and he advised princes about their kingdoms. He was honest and a modest advisor. Sudama was not as wealthy as Krishna, but he did help everyone in his village. They remained good friends. One day, Sudama's wife asked him, "Why don't you ask Krishna, your close friend, for some help? We have very little and our home needs fixing." Upon hearing this, Sudama became nervous. He didn't feel bad because he was poor. He didn't like to ask his friends for help, even though he was in difficulty. Despite this, he traveled to see Krishna. "Don't go empty-handed," said his wife. "You must take him something to offer to him." This was a tradition in India, to not go empty-handed to a guest's house. But Sudama was poor, so what could he take? He didn't have clothes or jewelry or the finest food. So he packed some small plain cooked rice in a cloth and made his way. Sudama entered a beautiful castle, a beautiful palace. As soon as Krishna saw Sudama, he rushed down to greet his oldest friend. "You must be tired," he said. "Please sit." And he offered Sudama a seat next to the throne. Sudama sat down shyly. Seeing the cloth Sudama was holding, Krishna asked, "What have you bought for me?" Sudama tried to hide his rice, but Krishna took the cloth. "Rice? You bought this for me? This would be great with some lentils. Thank you." Sudama relaxed and they shared a meal, chatting together. Joyful Krishna and Sudama as they'd always been, good friends no matter what. When Sudama reached home, he was shocked and surprised to see there was plenty of food and his home had been repaired. His wife was pleased. Sudama realized the wonder of his good friend Krishna. He thought the offer of rice to Krishna had demonstrated that a good act, no matter how small or simple, would get good results in return. So that I'll just pause there. That is the end of the story. Effectively, Sudama and Krishna were chatting as if they were good friends, and I think Sudama was having such a good time that he almost forgot to ask his friend for the thing that he had come there for. But Krishna, being wise and knowledgeable, and he could see that why his friend had come to see him, had decided to address and to give him what he needed in life anyway. So I'll pause there and ask fellow colleagues on the call to ask some questions, and we'll start with the discussion. Lindsay, is Sheba there as well?
Sorry, I turned my microphone off. Lindsay, would you like to start asking your question?
Okay. There was one expression in the text I didn't understand. I asked for clarification. It said divine or divine Maya, which is not an expression I'm familiar with. So.
Yes. So divine Maya is the idea that it's an illusion. Maya means illusion, but it's not an illusion in a negative sense that we are being deceived because it's divine. And that's basic. That goes back to the concept in Vedic culture, which is we all go through things in life, and things around us are there to they're simply there to as part of our stage in life. There are times when we do need to have a home that works, and we do need to have clothes, and we just sometimes do need to have nice food or a functioning car. But there's no need to be attached to them, because there are times in our life when we will move past those things. When we're born, when we work and we have families and eventually we pass away. But all of these things have a time and a place. They're presented to us as illusions because sometimes people get too attached to them and they think that that's what they need to survive. But what it means for fairness is that we can't look at something and think, this is mine, I made it, and it belongs to me. It's realizing that everything has a purpose in life. We all need to use these things, therefore we need to share them equitably, and not to see them as status symbols. There are things that we need, they're necessities, but we shouldn't get trapped into that and then perceive them as wants and therefore become selfish people. I hope that helps.
Yes, I get the concept. I'm not quite sure how it works in that particular quote. If you could just explain it. Is this, I presume this is this Krishna speaking in this quote at the end?
So this is Krishna speaking. So this is from passages, from lines 29 and 30 in the story.
Right. So when
Krishna is explaining to Sudama that he sees his good character.
Right, and people who've shaken off worldly desires brought forth my divine Maya. That's the bit I just.
Oh, that should be brought forth by. It's a typing error.
Oh, right. Okay.
I'll make sure
I was wondering how Krishna had.
No, I will make sure that gets fixed.
Right.
Apologies. And then Nadia, I'll talk to them about that.
Well, that makes it a bit clearer, right? I was wondering also. The story presents the justification for Krishna's kind treatment of Sudama is that Sudama himself has rid himself of worldly desires, therefore he deserves this treatment. But would that apply to people who haven't rid themselves of worldly desires? And if so, is that fair? Do you have to be a good person to receive good from the divine, a super good person, or can you just be an average person?
I think that is a really good point. And I think it's where the misconceptions happen when it comes to the Vedic culture and Hinduism, that you have to renounce everything in order to be recognized fairly, or to be recognized as a good person, or to be recognized by a divine energy. And there are a group of people who renounce very well and therefore they're better than other people, and I can see why that might be a misconception, but I think it's about understanding what worldly desires are. If you live within your means, so if we're thinking about the environment, and if we don't use things in excess, we still use them, we're still human beings, we recognize our position in the world, we haven't renounced those things. Worldly desires means if you renounce them, it doesn't mean you're no longer part of the world. In fact, it means that you realize your role in the world and how you can contribute. And it's about, again, as I said, recognizing that divine Maya is an illusion. We can't make it our entire existence. You might still need to use it. In that sense, you've renounced it.
Right. I just wanted to end by saying I have a beautiful book of Kangra paintings in which this story is illustrated, but I'd never read the story. So thank you for bringing it, because now I know what the pictures are about.
From a scriptural viewpoint, this is paraphrased by me, but those two lines at the end, 29 and 30, there is a whole section in the original text, where Krishna talks to Sudama at length about good character. And I think it's more important that we think about the pairing of these characters. And as you say, he's seen as a divine lord, as a god on earth. And then there's Sudama, who's a poor character. And I think there's so much in those two characters and how they talk to each other in the story that's just as important as what's being said. The fact that Krishna greets Sudama and treats him as an equal, lets him sit next to him by the throne, provides him with food, all the wonderful things in the palace, and doesn't judge him for those things, I think is just as important as the actual text itself.
Thank you, Lindsay.
I'm conscious of time, so
yes, I was going to just ask Shiva, did you have any comments or anything you'd like to ask or clarify?
Oh no, it was a lovely story. I've grown up watching movies and Bollywood and also in Indian TV, and there is often a reference of Lord Krishna and the stories are always very inspiring, and they bring us back to the goodness that can be developed in our character at any point in life. So where we have the strong female goddesses, and the way they protect people and the way they fight for justice. On the other hand, we also have Lord Krishna and the other gods who promote this goodness, this inherent goodness of human beings. So thank you, Rithi, for sharing. It was really nice. It was really good
And
to hear.
apologies about the typo.
No,
Anne and Nadia must have asked me 6 times to read it, and I missed it. I'm so sorry.
no worries.
No, not at all.
No worries, no worries. It really helped. It helped bring that point out, actually. Yeah. So don't worry about it. So I'm going to ask Sheba now, because we want to make the most of the time to have a go at sharing her story. Now, Sheba is a good friend of mine. She's from Pakistan, so she's joining late at night for us. I think very often when we think of Pakistan, we tend to think of it as being a Muslim country, but there are quite a few Christians there, and I just thought it would be an interesting dynamic to explore some Christian perspectives from a cultural Pakistani background. So I'm very excited. She was actually doing some research herself on the Bible and the Quran and what it has to say about justice. So I thought she would be a really interesting person to have along to share from her own personal experience, and some of the wisdom that she's gleaned from scriptures over her time of looking at both the Quran and the Bible. So I think that Sheba has asked for us to share a PowerPoint. Thank you so much, Lakshmi. That's brilliant. So over to you, Sheba.
Yes, thank you. So the story that I'll be reading is called Jesus and the Samaritan Woman. And so can we go to the next slide? Yes, and it's taken from the Gospels. Now, in the Bible, we have 2 parts. We have the Old Testament and we have the New Testament. And the New Testament is the part which talks about the life of Jesus. And there are 4 Gospels. And so this story is taken from the Gospel of John, from the 4th chapter, and it's 26 verses. But then there's a bit of a like an afterlude, which is also very important, and that is from verses 27 to 42. So let's read the story. But before we read the story, I just wanted to talk about that. Why did I select the story, and how does it speak about justice? So basically, we see through Jesus's life that he broke a lot of social boundaries. So, he would talk to certain people who were ostracized or who were not considered the in people to speak to. And so he would be speaking to prostitutes, he would be speaking to tax collectors, he would be speaking and healing lepers. And these were all the kinds of people, the groups which were not considered very much in vogue in those days for so many reasons. So he breaks this boundary by speaking to a Samaritan. So the Jews would not hang out with the Samaritans. And then he's speaking to a woman. So there was a gender difference. And she was a lady who had been married many times. So we presume that she was socially distanced by people because that was quite a traditional society of that time. And what does he do? He restores the woman's confidence, and he informs her about life and showing her about her life, and he shows her that she is important to him. And so he gives a voice to people who were muted. And then he does something amazing. He reveals himself to her as the Messiah. Now, the Jews and the Samaritans, they were all waiting for the Messiah. And Jesus did not reveal himself to everyone, but he reveals himself to her. And so he kind of makes her as part of his team. So we all know that we might know that he had this team of disciples who were sure that he was the Messiah. But then he reveals himself to a Samaritan woman, and makes her part of the team. So that was, really something which shows his way of justice, and it takes me back to Lindsay's story that, God reverses the roles. And so that's why I selected this story. So I'd like to read it. Next slide, please. Jesus and the Samaritan woman. Now Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. So he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria. When he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his livestock?" Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give in them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." He told her, "Go call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say that you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have said is quite true." "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." "Woman," Jesus replied, "believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming, and has now come, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks. God is Spirit, and his worshippers must worship in the Spirit and in truth." So it's quite a heavy packed story, and there's a lot of theology in it as well, but I just want to focus on the fact that Jesus just broke so many social boundaries, and he brought in somebody who was from an outer circle on so many bases, like her life choices, having 5 husbands, and then in being in a living relationship with somebody at that time. I mean, it's quite outrageous, but Jesus just demonstrated to the entire world in all eternity that for him these boundaries did not exist, and he demonstrated for all of us, that we shouldn't be judgmental. And I feel that he did a lot for her mental health as well. I mean, I was reading a commentary which said that she came in the afternoon because in the morning all the women would come to the well, and probably there was so much gossip and so much toxicity that it was very difficult for her to handle. And so it makes us think about how God really thinks about us, and how he wants us to consider people around us, and to be accepting of people's life choices, their religion, the religious choices, their gender, all kinds of things. So yes.
Thank you, Sheba. That's been really helpful. I wonder whether or not, Rithi, have you got any questions or points of clarification that you'd like to ask about that story?
Just taking a look at the original text, when at the end it says, "Sir, give me water so that I won't get thirsty, and keep coming to draw water." How do you think? What does that line? How do you interpret that line as to kind of how the woman might be feeling at the end of receiving this from Jesus?
What happened is that at the end of the story, that she went back to her people and she told them about Jesus, and so see, there are many interpretations, and people say that her soul needed some kind of satisfaction, and she found, like, having had so many failed relationships, that she was a person who was seeking solace, and she found it in Jesus. And so when he talks about living water, it's talking about that her soul would find its solace in God. So that's how many people interpret it. Yeah. And I take it in the sense that Jesus's team of disciples were 12 men, and here we have a lady from Samaria, a region and a religious creed who are ostracized by the Jewish community there. And so, they had the differences and all that. So Jesus just showed that, we need to be together, whatever religious beliefs, whatever creed, whatever um, life choices, we need to give solace to one another, and accept one another, basically. Yeah.
Can I ask something in relation to that? What Jesus says to her seems to contradict that. He says salvation comes from the Jews, and he says, "You
Yes,
Samaritans
yes.
worship what you don't know." So he actually sounds
Yes.
so he's dissing the
Yeah,
Samaritans.
I also got stuck on that, that why did he do that? But I guess he was staying true to him being, he was also a rabbi. So I think that he was staying true to the prophecies of the past. But then he says that a new type of followers, worshippers would be there, although the Messiah would be from the Jews, but the worshippers, who are the true worshippers, would worship God in the spirit, and that's what God seeks. It's not the place, it's not who you are, but you worship God in spirit. So at the end, I guess, that whole point comes together. So
But
so
I,
so
that, I also find that a little difficult, because Jesus in another gospel says that nothing from the law shall pass away, and anyone who stops people doing commandments would be better if they hadn't been born. So I find it quite a contradictory picture of Jesus here.
yeah, because he was the fulfillment of the law, you see. So he would keep on referring back. But I guess this story is more about breaking the social boundaries and making people see that, don't be so rigid. I mean, even in my context here, it's very interesting that, um, even in educational settings, like recently what we had an author session, and we invited in our university a poet, and our head of department was there, and another head of department was there. So there were two men, and the poet himself was a man, and then there were a few ladies, and at tea time there was, like, I could clearly see that the men were more comfortable talking amongst themselves, and it even happens, many times, that religious leaders would talk to men, so I think this story is more focused on the boundaries, and how, because he went on talking to tax collectors. Tax collectors were people who took taxes from people, so they were not, and they would be embezzling or something. So I guess this is more about that. But you're right, Lindsay, because these are the parts where you have to really get into theology and all that. So yeah, absolutely right. Yeah.
The other bit I found very mysterious is when he brings up the question of her previous husbands. Now, at the time, it was very easy to lose husbands because they just died. So I'm not quite sure why we would assume she'd had failed relationships. She must have,
But
she might have been a very
five of them
unfortunate
couldn't
woman.
have. Yes,
Yeah.
that's true. You know,
So-
like one or two might have died. You know.
Yeah. So again, I'm not quite
Yes.
sure what he's doing here. Why does he?
Oh.
Why is he mentioning the 5 previous husbands and when
the
she
current
says
one.
he doesn't have a husband and he says, but you have somebody who is not your husband. This sounds, it does actually sound to
bit
me like
rude.
condemnation. He sounds as though he's saying there are scandalous bits of your life that I'm now revealing in public.
No, but he wasn't revealing in public. It was just the two of them. You see, there was nobody there.
Yeah.
And he was. I mean, when I read it, I
Yeah.
always take it in the sense that he is letting her know that, you know, you're like, you know, we have these people in society who seem to have a very perfect life, and they've made the correct choices, and everything seems to be going really well. So he's showing her that I'm not sitting and talking to somebody who's ticked all the boxes and or life has gone very straight for them. I'm sitting with somebody whose life has gone maybe in circles or in a different path, and you know, giving the message to all of us that, you know, we are very judgmental many times, you know. So that's the message that I took from this, that don't be so judgmental, and or when things go wrong with us, that we shouldn't be so judgmental of ourselves as well, you know, because sometimes we might fear that even God would not consider us so worthy. But here he is talking to her and saying that I'm going to give you living water, and revealing himself to her, making her his kind of ambassador to her people. So
I also,
you know,
I also wonder whether she actually understands what he says about the living water, because
yeah, I don't think she
she
did,
says,
but
give me this water so I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming
yes,
here to draw water. So is she
yeah,
taking him
yes.
literally at this point?
Very literally, yes, she did take
Uh,
him very. I mean, it was a surprising situation for her, wasn't it? I mean, she was just going about her day, and suddenly this fellow comes and talks to her, and then asks her for water. Then he says, "I'm going to give you better water," and things like that. So I mean, she
I think
wouldn't
it's about,
be.
I think maybe that's what I asked as well, isn't it? About, so I won't have to keep coming here. And I think it's about sort of understanding from her point of view. Do we understand
Yes.
when we receive something, do we know what it means? It seems very, you know,
Yeah. Wow.
it's a metaphorical use of the word
Yes.
water. Does she get it? I'm sorry, Lindsay, if I misinterpreted
Yeah.
what you were
no,
saying.
that's what I was wondering too.
No,
Yes.
yes. She probably took it very, very literally, because they did start off when he asked her for a drink. But I guess towards the end, she just kind of did understand. Yeah. Mm.
Well, I'm aware time is ticking on, and this is a really, really interesting conversation, and digging really quite deep into some themes that are not always very easy to come to terms with. So